All right, I should be screen sharing. Am I screen sharing with all of you? Excellent. All right.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. Well, welcome to week 3. Happy Labor Day. Seems like weird to, everything changes now. Online, it doesn't sort of matter whether it's Labor Day or not, but I guess some people will probably take the day today and then watch this tomorrow. So that's fine. Good. Last week, we talked a little bit about taking pictures of sounds, and Julia stayed on with me afterwards to talk about this because she was like, what do you mean when you say you can take pictures of sounds? So I decided to put in a little example to show you, and we're actually going to come back to this later, but essentially what we can do is use this as something we call biovisual feedback. So because we can actually see the acoustic signal, and vowels and different consonants make different pictures. We can actually take a picture of a word. If someone says a word, we can look at what the acoustic signal says, and we can use this to give students biovisual feedback. So instead of doing listen, imitate, and repeat, what we do is we have a picture of the word, and then we have the student try and match that picture. That's why it's called biovisual feedback, because what they're doing is trying to make the sounds correctly to recreate the acoustic picture. So here's an example of what I mean. This is an acoustic picture of the word pad. So P-A-D. And what you see here is very specific acoustic signals for each sound that's in that word. So this bit at the beginning, this is complete silence, and that's the mouth closure for P, right? So the first thing that happens is you close your mouth and then you open it up, right? That opened sound gives you all these kinds of noises because that's the aspiration. So all the sort of kind of noises that you see, picture that you see there, that's the rest of the P. So this is the closed lips, then opens up for the P, and you get a sound for the aspiration. Here, this middle part right here, these are called vowel formants. And whenever you see these, that's a vowel. And these formants are very interesting because they're different depending on the vowel. So this is a cat vowel. And so this has 3 formants, format 1, format 2, format 1, format 2, and format 3. And if it was a O vowel, for example, its formats would look very different. And then, so this is a long vowel. And then we've got a D sound. So the mouth closes again for the D sound, but it doesn't close completely because it's a voiced sound. It's not like this that's an unvoiced sound. So you get pad, and here where you release the D, you get this picture right here. So what this means is you can show students what they're missing. So this is called a CSL. I have 3 of these at the lab. So anytime, we're out of this nightmare and anybody is anywhere near Commerce, I'll come and show you. You can come and I'll show you exactly how it works. And this that I've written the word in, this is where the student would try. So I would give this as an example. I would say pad, and then click it down here, and then the student tries to match that exact picture. So instead of saying listen and repeat, you say repeat and try and match this picture. So if, for example, they're using the wrong vowel, if they're saying pod instead of pad, their vowel formats will look different. If they're not using the D, if they're saying pa instead of pad, this whole part will be missing. So you can say you've got to finish with the D sound in order to get that whole part right there. If they're doing something wrong, if they're voicing instead of voiceless here, that will come up with something there instead of the silence. So this is a great way to have students literally keep saying it, and then they're trying to match the pictures together. So they are repeating, but they're repeating trying to match the pictures. This was particularly good, and we'll look at this later, but we use this with the Vietnamese students who were not pronouncing the beginning of the syllable and the end of the syllable. So what they would have was a picture that looks much more like just the vowel. So it would be a sort of little bit of something here and then nothing at the end, because all they were really doing was saying par instead of pad. So then you could say to them, you have to keep doing this until you make this part right here. And that means that you're saying the coda to the syllable. So we had some luck with that. The teachers really enjoyed doing it, and we will read an article that we wrote about that. This is a professional piece of equipment that's also used with speech pathology, but you can get the same idea with freeware programs. And there's one particular freeware program that all the researchers and my PhD students use, and some MA teachers have used to work on pronunciation, because it's a free program. So you download it, it's perfectly safe. It's called Praat, P-R-A-A-T in capital letters, and that's because it's from Holland. So that's actually apparently a word in Dutch. And you can just download it onto your computer, and then all you need is a microphone. You won't get exactly this picture, but you get something very similar, so that you can see what it is that the students are doing, and you can use it as biovisual feedback. So that's what I mean, and I'm just going to turn off the phone. That's what I mean by pictures of sounds. So Julia, does that make more sense to you now?
Yes, it does. I actually tried to download that software yesterday, but I think because of my Adobe Flash, it wasn't enabled, so I couldn't download it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or also it said that it wasn't connecting to a secure site, so I don't really know how I can download it.
I can guarantee you that that's fine, as long as you're using the actual Praat site, not, you know, not some site that's pretending that it's the Praat site, if you see what I mean. You know, sometimes I realize I'm downloading an ad site, you know, that's pretending to be the site that I actually want. So as long as it's the Praat site, it will be, it's 100% safe. So anyway, if you want to have another go at it, have another go. Anybody else that wants to have a go, go ahead. It's basically another part of a toolkit. It's another way to try and show learners what's going on that isn't just that plain old-fashioned listen and repeat model that they might not be able to hear. All right, so we will come back and look at that, but later on, but that's how that goes. All right, so today what we're going to focus on, and stop me anytime you want to ask a question or you have a comment, is the vowel system. And if you look in your week 3, you've got the following materials. This PowerPoint, then you've got a pedagogical vowel chart, which we'll go through in a second, a color voucher information guide that you will use for your activity, a reading post, and your first activity. Okay, so let's have a look. Vowels. Vowels are completely different from consonants, right? And I'm sure you know this from 555. But the big difference is consonants are attenuated in some way. So in some way, you're either fully stopping or partially stopping your articulators. So in the case of something like B, you're fully stopping your articulators, right? Because you're putting your lips together and stopping everything and then blowing it out. So that's b. Okay, in a word like t or d, okay, you're partially blocking your articulators because your tongue's coming up and hitting the roof of your mouth. Vowels are open sounds. So I, you can just keep saying them over and over again. Okay, it's the reason why doctors say ah, right? If they said so that they can look down your throat, and they say ah. If they said say duh, they wouldn't get you very far. They won't be able to see very much. So vowels are always open sounds, and that's essentially the huge difference between them, which is why you get semi-vowels, like sometimes l and r are called semi-vowels because they have some open characteristics as compared to something like t and d. But as far as we're concerned at this point, we've got open sounds that are vowels and attenuated sounds, which are consonants. The thing with vowels is, although we can point to some of their articulatory characteristics, which we will be doing, what's back, what's front, what's high, what's low, each dialect is going to place those in a different, slightly different place in the mouth, okay? Which is why they sound different. And sometimes even idiolects, so sometimes even individuals will place them in a different part. So I, for some reason, I say down instead of down, and it's not a dialectal thing. I don't even know why I do it. I've said it since I was a kid. So that would be idiolectal. That would be something that just I do, okay? So all vowels are on a continuum. So if you have, for example, a Boston vowel like pack your car, then it's a slightly different place than we have park. Well, you guys say park, right? I don't quite know how you say it, but anyway, so we're all saying it somewhat differently, but it's in the system. There's this whole system of vowels, and if you have Boston vowels, that park the car fits into the system where you have everything else. So it's all about everything fitting into one system that you have. So some dialects have some vowels that others don't have, which is also tricky. So for example, I think while I was in Georgia, I was told that they did not differentiate between caught, a baby caught, and caught, as in I caught a fish. Texas, talk to me. Do you distinguish between caught and caught, or is it caught and caught?
Caught and caught.
Yeah, okay. So it was like that in Georgia too. And so in some places there'll just be a distinction between two vowels that in other dialects there isn't. And finally, the great vowel shift, which we're not going to discuss, but if you want to look at it, there's some lovely Wikipedia entries. But that meant that everything got shifted from the orthography. So now we have even more confusion with vowels for learners of English, because how the spelling works, how the orthography works, and how the sound works is different. So when you put all that together, vowels can sound kind of, well, scary for one, and confusing and complicated. So what you don't want to do is address all of that all at the same time, right? Which is why we have a pedagogical vowel chart, right? Just take it one step at a time. It's really important not to overwhelm yourself as well as not to overwhelm your students, right? Just because there's no correct set of English vowels doesn't mean that you can't just work with one variety at a time, right? So in this case, I'm going to try and work, and you're going to work with the North American English vowel system, right? In the UK, if I was teaching English in the UK, I would be doing a Southern Standard British system. So it would be a little bit different. You've still got the same parts of the mouth, but things are just organized slightly differently. So yes, it's true. Texas vowels sound different from Boston vowels. We don't have a pa, the ka vowel, but you don't want to get into that with your students until they've got a good sense of the general American vowel system. Adult learners often ask because they're curious, because they went to New York or they went to Boston, and that's fine. What you don't want to do is start saying, you know, let's do a detailed journey through the dialectology of general American across the states, right? You want to keep it just with a basic pedagogical vowel chart and then worry about the other stuff once they've got the system down. Because often for many learners from an EFL environment, the system itself might be slightly off. If they have quite a limited interaction with native English speakers, and particularly if they're, say, from a rural part of Thailand or China or Vietnam or somewhere, their exposure to the vowel system may be a little bit off. Often if they've got local teachers and that they're, when they come in, their vowel system is just a little bit off where it should be. So what you need to worry about is really this basic system that we're going to look at today, and let the rest of it sort of go for a while. All right. So what is this basic system I speak of? Okay. Right, it's time to grab your textbook, should be around you somewhere, so that you can follow what I'm talking about here. So vowels are created by changing the resonance cavity, which is the mouth, basically, and each vowel has a sort of production space in the mouth, which is, so we work out where one is based on where the other one is. So if you go to figure 4.1 on 116, you will see that quadrant right there in the mouth, and that's typically how we talk about vowels. And so the IPA is a kind of version of this, but looking at that quadrant in the mouth will give you a good sense of how it works. So you get high vowels, low vowels, front vowels, back vowels, rounded vowels, and unrounded vowels. And you can see that in figure 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, right? So a front vowel would be something like E, E. And if you say it to yourself, E, you can say it out loud because you're muted, you'll feel that it's at the front and it's at the top. So I want you all on 3 to do it to yourself. 1, 2, 3. E. You should feel it's at the front and at the top. Now, on the other hand, if you do a vowel like ah, you should feel that it's at the back and your tongue's down. So it's at the back and it's at the bottom. So on 3, 1, 2, 3, ah. Which is, of course, why the doctor uses that particular vowel, because he or she can then see everything that's going on in your mouth, because it's at the back, your tongue's the lowest it's ever going to be, and they can see inside as much of your mouth as possible, right? And it's an open sound, so it's a continuing sound. All right, and the other one is round or not round. So we have, for example, E and oo. So on 3, you want to go E and then oo, and you should see the same thing that I'm doing with my mouth too. So 1, 2, 3, E, oo, and that's the roundedness. And some languages have a lot of rounded vowels, like French is one of them. And I always thought French, that's one of the reasons French sounds so adorable, because it's always like, ooh, 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 and with these lovely little rounded sounds. But that's just me. All right, so in order to describe those, remember with consonants, we use place, manner, and voicing. Well, all vowels are voiced, so we're not going to use voicing. You can't do a vowel without voicing it. You can whisper it, of course, but you can't have unvoiced vowels. So we have a different set of criteria. The first one is plus or minus rounded. So what we just did. So if you look at 4.3, that's spread versus rounded. So 1 is spread and 5 is rounded and 3 is drop, which we'll talk about in a second. So it's the difference between pull and eat, for example. The second is called tense and lax. Now, I know you've probably done a lot of this in 555, so this is just a little review. And also, if you're confused about anything from 555, do say, because, you know, we're focusing on it here. So tense or lax has also been called in pedagogical circles long versus short, right? And some people will get upset with you if you say it's long vowel versus a short vowel because that doesn't exist, da, da, da. I really don't care. Whatever works for you, okay? This is a basic pedagogical system. So it's the difference between something like ship, I sound, and E, sheep, okay? And that is on page 118 on figure 4.4. You'll see that they've marked the short vowels and marked the short lax vowels and marked the long tense vowels. Okay, the next one is tongue and jaw position, and this is where you drop low or go high. So this is what we did when we did the difference between something like E, where your mouth is quite tense, and ah, where you completely drop your jaw. This is often a problem, by the way. Sometimes learners don't drop their jaws enough for those low back vowels, and that can be a real problem for intelligibility. So it's well worth doing some kind of there's sort of theater-based exercises and so on, where you get students to kind of, you know, drop their jaw as far as they can go and then say ah, and get a sense. So they get a sense of the kind of mouth movements that they need to be looking at. This also, of course, improves muscle memory. So those kinds of exercises are great because vowels are all about moving this whole part of your face and your jaw. All those kind of activities are fun for adults as well as kids. And again, if you go to page, so you're sort of going to be reading through all of this, but if you go to page 125, yes, if you go to page 125, you've got all of these things classified for you. So you have a landscape table on 4.2, and that's got all your vowels classified and all their jaw positions, tongue positions, tense, lax, and lip position, okay? Finally, the difference that matters pedagogically is one sound, so monophthongs versus diphthongs. So a monophthong is something like E, and we call it a monophthong because it's just one opening, one sound, okay? In a diphthong, what that means is your mouth shape is moving during the vowel, okay? So if you do a long diphthong, if you do a diphthong and you turn it into a long sound, you'll see what I mean. So one diphthong is oi, right, for boy. So that vowel, oi, you can see that in order to make that vowel, that single diphthong vowel, I have to change my mouth movement. Oi, oi. So these are sometimes called vowel plus glides as well, because you end up with a oi sound, okay? But so these characteristics are summarized for you again. Well, are they on 125? Yes, diphthong. So they have I for fly, ow, and oi. So ow is like ow. So you can see how your mouth and your tongue is moving. Ow, ow on the one side. Okay. Any questions about those criteria or making those sounds? All okay with those? Okay. So now what we're going to do is focus on a pedagogical vowel chart. And this might be the difference between what you did in 555 and what you're doing here with me. Okay. 555, you were introduced to the IPA. Pedagogical chart is also the IPA, but it's a partial IPA. It's not the whole thing. So just as we did with consonants, we're going to focus on phonemic quality of vowels in the vowel chart. That means a simplified version of the IPA in which certain qualities and diacritics are not included. You can obviously add them later if, again, as we talked about last week, if you've got someone that is absolutely bound and determined to sound like a North American, they're going to have to work on some of these teeny tiny things which come into the diacritics like nasalization and so on. But if you're working with someone for a standard of general intelligibility, you can just work with the articulation of the basic vowels. So what you need is articulation of the basic vowels and at least an idea of them to be able to perceive stress patterns on vowels, okay, even if they're not particularly good at producing them initially, okay. So in order to do that, I have included in your materials this little pedagogical vowel chart which has little animals on it for the sounds. So it turns out all my adult learners have loved this little vowel chart with the animals on. They don't feel like I'm talking down to them or anything. They've always had great fun with it. So feel free to go ahead and use it. In your book, which is why I've given you a separate copy of it, by the way, in your book, you've got it on page, where am I looking, 115. 116. So if you look on page 115, that's their idea of the pedagogical chart, and we'll see that we include one more than they do on this chart. All right. So the way to do this chart is to you can go all the way around your mouth. So you can say and you should do that on a regular basis because it's really good muscle training. So you should certainly make your students do that on a regular basis. Then you've got.
You sound like Dory.
Say that, Anne. What do you say?
You sound like Dory. Dory from.
That's so funny because someone else said that last year. Someone else said I sounded like Dory, and I totally forgot I sounded like Dory. Yeah, she's having a bit of a rough time on Ellen right now, isn't she? So yes, so Dory is a great example, particularly for your kids. If you're teaching kids, that's a great example. They love Dory. Okay. So it's just to show you that what vowels are about is about positioning in the mouth. The E is an E because it's not an it, okay? And it's not an A and it's not an E. You know, everything, it starts at the front, at the top, and then goes down and around and comes up at the front with the rounded vowels. So that's why I want you to think about it in that way. So let's have a look at each of them, of your monophthongs. You've got E, so the long, I, the short, often a problem for Spanish speakers and an important problem for Spanish speakers, because if you're not careful, you don't say a sheet of paper, you say a shit of paper, which is not good. So we want to work on the long, short difference right there. Then we've got A and E. Then we've got A, and then O. Now, this for you is, so this is like dog. Can someone say dog for me, please? Can someone say dog?
Dog.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Yes. So my dog and your dog are slightly different. So that's an interesting place where my back low vowel is just a little bit off from where your back low vowel is. That's a difference between Southern Standard British English and North American Standard English. So we do the same job with it. It's a low back vowel, but it's in a slightly different place. And then this is the or sound in court or hawk, and then o, and then the short and the long oo for kangaroo. Then you've got a special sound right here that is the American R sound that goes with butter, for example, that sound. So in, as I think I said last week, in British English, we don't have this. So if we say butter or butter, we just say at the end. And that is that little unstressed schwa right there, okay? But you guys have a sort of slightly more centralized higher vowel with an R attached to it. And that is literally the difference between butter, butter. So yeah. If you want to listen to what these really should sound like in North American English, you have a CD that goes with the book. In that central part where you have that unstressed schwa, you also have a stressed caret, meaning C-A-R-E-T, not carrot that you eat. And that's this little carrot thing right there. Why do you say, do we have that? Which I'm sure you probably know. Because every word in English has a stress, a primary stress. So if you have a word like duck, right, with a sound, okay, it's not an unstressed vowel. It's a stressed vowel. It's a stressed central vowel, okay, that looks very much like an unstressed vowel, but because there's only one syllable in duck and you stress that syllable, it becomes a stressed vowel. If you remember looking back at this, for example, you see where I had these format structures for for pad or cat. If you look at the difference between a schwa, so the unstressed vowel, and the caret, the stressed central vowel, you see they have similar format structures, but the stressed central vowel is much longer than the schwa. So this is something that, again, you can do. If you can download that thing, you can have a look at it and you can actually do that yourself and do it. So they're in the same place in the mouth, but they have a slightly different quality to them. One stressed and one isn't stressed. Okay, so that's the basic monophthongs that you need. And then you've got more than 3. People sort of argue the toss about how many diphthongs there are, but essentially if you've got these 3 down, you're good. And that is I for fly or lion, ow for cow, and oi for, it's supposed to be a boy. So I, ow, oi are the 3 major diphthongs that you use. So with this, you've got a pedagogical vowel chart. Now there is one difference between this one and the one that they present in 115. So anybody who's looking at page 115, actually there's 2 differences. What is not included? So page 115, you've got 14 vowels. You've got more than that on here. Can anyone tell me what's different about what's in the book and what's up on your pedagogical voucher? It's not a test. Just go for it.
They don't include the schwa and the North American ER.
Good. Okay, so the schwa is not listed on your vowel chart in your book. They're gonna deal with that later when they talk about unstressed vowels. And the other one that they do that's interesting is they don't include that middle butter vowel that your pedagogical chart does. I think it's important that they do that, because on the pedagogical chart, because it's a very, as we discussed last week, it's a very uniquely American thing. So certainly in terms of perception, they need to hear it. But also if they want to sound more American in production, they need to be able to make that vowel sound. They need to be able to add that onto the end of it. Okay, so those are your basic vowels. Anybody got any questions about any of those basic vowels?
Sorry, I just can't see what the picture is for the short oo sound. Ooh.
Short oo. That's supposed to be a woodpecker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, wood, ooh, ooh. Yeah. Anybody got any other questions about? Is all this familiar from 555 out of interest? Did you do all this in 555?
It seems familiar.
Seems familiar, Caroline? Okay, good.
Yes.
Good.
We didn't spend that much time on it though, so.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I obviously, you know, sound systems is part of the systems of English altogether, but I want to be clear that we're focusing here on the pedagogical aspects of the sound system. So we're not, we are airbrushing some things, and I think that's important, because I think one of the reasons that teachers don't like this is it strikes them as incredibly complicated, and they're not even sure how they explain it to themselves, let alone to somebody else. So it's important that you don't go down that path. If your students you can do this, all of you can do this, and if your students can do this, you have given them the best introduction to the sound system that you can give them. So in terms of vowels, so let the rest of it lie till you're more comfortable with it. Okay, there's a couple of other things. So your book then takes you through a gazillion fabulous exercises that you can do with different vowels, and so everything as we did last week. So you have minimal pairs, then you have guided practice, then you have more control practice, then you have minimal pairs, then you have control practice, then you have some guided practice, and then you have some open practice. And your book takes you all the way through those and vowel sounds. And later in the semester, you'll be producing lesson plans. And this is one of the, when you do that, you'll want to go back and look at some of these pieces of information, because this is where you might get some of the exercises that you choose. This is where you might decide what it is you're going to focus on in terms of what's important and what isn't important. Like, you know, I don't want to see anyone doing a 50-minute or lesson plan on necessarily the difference between, you know, the and ter, when we've already said that's a low functional load. If you've got limited amount of time, you don't want to do it. There's a whole thing in here about what vowel contrasts have high functional loads and are important. So these are the kind of things that you're going to use to do that a little bit later on. So you're going to come back to that. But there's a couple of other things that this chapter talks about that I want to point out to you. One of them is the importance of environment. Now, again, if we go back to the rather handy picture, this is a vowel formant structure. So every vowel has these dark striations. Okay, the actual pattern of the striations varies depending upon what the vowel is, but everyone has these striations. And what happens is the striations are affected by what comes after it and before it, okay, which is what we call coloring or vowel quality changes. So in this case, because you've got two straightforward consonants, there's really not much change in the striations, in the formant structure. So the sound is not changed very much. But if, for example, so you can see a little bit, you can see the formants are moving a little bit to get ready for that D sound. Now, if you get sounds like semi-vowels like L and R, they really do a number on these formant structures. They change. So as your vowel is moving into the R and the L, they change completely. So this is what we mean by the importance of environment, okay? And in fact, what I should do is get you a picture of that for next week so you can see, because that's why it can get difficult to understand what vowels and are going on when you have it followed or preceded by something that's going to change that formant structure. So this is called vowel coloring, and we talked about it a little bit last week. So for example, okay, so one of the first things is if you take the words pat and pad, okay, it's the exact same vowel, but in the case of pad, because that a vowel is followed by a voiced consonant, it's going to be longer. And in the case of pat, because that vowel is followed by a voiceless consonant, the vowel itself is going to be shorter. So that's something that happens to vowels when you put them inside a actual context. Their length changes, and it has nothing to do with the vowel itself. It has to do with the context in which you put the vowel, okay? L and R are also color, make vowels change. Remember my dark L, you might remember my dark L from last week. So I say Sal when I'm calling Sal. Adado, I say Sal, and with a what at the end instead of a L at the end. That's my dark L. That's because my dark L basically disappears. It's what we call vocalicized. It changes into a kind of vowel sound. Remember, I had the problem with tall. I say tall, and so they think I'm saying two. Also in UK English, we talked about last week, I don't have the R coloring, so I will say butter instead of butter. So that's a problem, potentially, and many of your students will be the same. So if you look on page 127 at these rather handy teacher boxes, one on 127 and one on 129. There's teacher boxes throughout. But if you look at page 127, you've got these R colored vowels. So you've got I versus ear in mirror, okay? And if you look at the note to teachers box directly underneath, many learners, especially those who speak open syllable languages, but also learners that have learned English as open syllable, so Southern Standard British vowels will be open syllable, will have severe difficulty, may have, pronouncing R-colored vowels in one syllable words like fire and hour. So if you listen to me say, I say fire an hour, but you guys say fire an hour or something similar, okay? For better, so you're going to try and work with any learners like that to try and increase that R color sound if they're going to be spending 99% of their time in American English with American listeners. And it's useful to begin with disyllabic words such as skier and lawyer, and then have them work with a word like fire, as though it's a disyllabic word, fire instead of fire. Okay. Now, if you look underneath at the transcription, a particularly good one is flower, like a flower in a garden, and I will say flower, which you see there, and they suggest that you teach it to them if they're saying that by saying flower, flower, so that they have that kind of diphthongy kind of thing in order to make that sound at the end. So that's the note to teachers for the R's. And then there's also a nice note to teachers on page 129 for your L's, the L coloring, where they do exactly the same thing. And they say if you've got somebody who's got, for example, coal. So for me, the word C-O-A-L is coal. You can hear that I'm swallowing that final L. It's completely vocalized. So the way to do it, if you've got a student that does that, they suggest is do coal, coal. So you're sort of dividing up the first and the second part of the word until they get used to saying coal, coal. Okay. Again, if you get familiar with this biovisual feedback, this is something that you can use, because you can absolutely see the difference between someone like me saying coal with a very short vocalized no L, and somebody doing it the American way with a long vowel and then a dark semi-vowel L on the end of it. They look completely different. So it's another handy way to address that. All right, so importance of environment, particularly with R's and L's. Again, I always said, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze, I think. No, I'm okay. I always said that it didn't matter that I said vowel instead of vowel. And then I was teaching a class to undergraduates, and I gave them an exam, and I said, what's the difference between vowels and consonants? And half of them wrote vowel, V-O-W. And I was like, how is that even possible? But they were just going with the acoustic signal, even though they must have known the word vowel. They had been writing in their notes all the time, Lucy's saying vowel, right? V-O-W, so it's vowels and consonants. So I realized that, you know, potentially there is an area of confusion there. And certainly if you have a learner that's like me, that's super vocalizing, swallowing that final R or that final L, you should probably work on it. You totally want to work on it if the student wants to work on it to sound more American. It is important for perception. They should be able to understand that there is that final coloring in American sound system as opposed to a sound system they might be more familiar with. I mean, if we take Anne, for example, you're in Hong Kong, correct? So is the standard British English there, or is it really American? Has it changed to become American?
It's changing, but it's really very British standard.
Right.
Used to be the high standard, but you see pronunciation.
Not so much anymore. So there are also tons of places, particularly around Asia, but also in Eastern Europe, where they're working with textbooks that are super duper duper old, and they're almost always British. And so they almost always come to you with a set of vowels that don't sound quite right to you. So then what you want to do is really use some of this information to work out what it is that's slightly off. so that then you can help them sort of pull it back towards American sounds. That said, I mean, you know, if they come at you with a British sound system. Oh, and the other thing that I do love about learners is when you critique their vowel system, they will often, you know, because you basically can't understand the vowels that they're using, they will say, oh, well, it's British. I learned British English, not American English. So you can also tell them that it probably isn't quite British either. All right, the other super important part of this chapter, and we will come back to this several times because stress in English is so important. So there's two kinds of stress in English. One is word stress and one is sentence stress. So for example, I can say, where did you go? Or I can say, where did you go? Or I can say, where did you go? Okay, that I'm playing with sentence stress. Okay, if I change the stress, if I have word stress, then it's the difference between something like hippopotamus, right, where the primary stress is on the middle syllable. Okay, so you can, if a word has sentence stress, it will usually be stressed on the citation word stress. So you wouldn't say, I saw a hippopotamus. You would say, I saw a hippopotamus, right? So that would have word stress and sentence stress on hippopotamus, right? But so the word and the sentence will fall, but you wouldn't say, I saw a hippopotamus, which would be sentence stress on every single word. Now, this is often a huge problem, particularly for low-level learners, because they are often told something that we call a teacher-induced error, which is that stress falls on all nouns, verbs, and adjectives. And so what they end up doing is stressing all the nouns, verbs, and adjectives in a sentence, which is way too many stresses in one sentence. And we will look at this in detail in the second part of the course in my book. I spent a lot of time talking about the difference between word stress and sentence stress because it's a huge problem for intelligibility. So when it comes to word stress, every word in English has a stress. So as I said before, if it's a single syllable word, that stress is on that single syllable, okay? It's called a citation stress, and it's always in the same place. So it's always hippopotamus, okay? So and it's the stress that's marked in the dictionary, right? Whenever you see a word, you see a stress mark in the dictionary. That is citation word stress. Now, there's also secondary stress and tertiary stress. So hippopotamus. So hippo is a secondary stress and the major stress is on the second to last. However, really, at this point, you don't need to worry about secondary and tertiary stress. If your students can correctly use primary word stress, so just the one syllable that has the primary stress, and can correctly use sentence stress, you're golden. You don't have to worry about fiddling around with secondary stress and tertiary stress and all that stuff, okay? So if every word only has one primary stress, okay, that means that other vowels that are in that word either have secondary stress or are unstressed. So what we're interested in is the difference between stressed, primary stress, and unstressed, because for intelligibility, that seems to be where the significant issue is. Either it carries a primary stress or it has an unstressed central vowel, schwa. Okay, now I'm sure you did the schwa in 555, is that correct? Did you do the schwa? Anybody?
Well, we learned about it, but I don't know what you mean by do the
Do
schwa.
it. Okay, good. Excellent. So, so what happened, all I mean by that is understanding that for your learners, you're trying to get them to do the difference between an unstressed vowel and a primary stressed vowel. So if you have a simple disyllabic word, two-syllabic word like mother, that there should be this stressed syllable and then this unstressed central vowel at the end. So mother, father, well, except for you guys go mother, father. It's still, and that is actually that at the end is that thing right there, that thing, that central that's somewhere, but it's basically a schwa with an e on it, with an r on it. So every word, so that's what you're trying to get them to do, the difference between a unstressed vowel and a primary stressed vowel. There is also something called a shwi and a shwu. A shwi is the little it sound in happy because it's unstressed. And a shwu, what's a shwu? It's a word with an unstressed u vowel at the end of it, and I can't think of any examples right now. But that's a shwu. But generally speaking, we just work with the schwa. So you can think about this both in terms of perception and production. Okay, as we have said with everything. Think of I don't know how many of you remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California, but he always used to pronounce it California. And when one time he had an interview and the interviewer picked him up on this and said, why do you say California? He said, because you all are too lazy to say it properly, because it's an E vowel in there. Just look at the spelling. So he had completely gotten this wrong, right? Because it's not got anything to do with the spelling. It has to do with the fact that the kala is an unstressed vowel that follows the primary stress, or sorry, the secondary stress in that case, California. So that unstressed vowel, it gets smushed into a schwa. But I always thought it was great that he was like, no, I say the name of my state properly. I say California. So that was a good example of production. And obviously everybody understood when he said California that he meant California. So there wasn't a problem of intelligibility. But the reason that the interviewer brought it up, of course, was because it sounds very non-native like, and he was just playing around. My memory is that it was kind of a fun interview. It wasn't a horrible thing that was going on. But that's a production issue. And again, that depends on your priorities and the priorities of your learner. If they want to say California and it's completely understandable, who cares, right? On the other hand, perception of the schwa is super important. And because there are many languages that don't have these centralized unstressed vowels, that can often be a problem. They can miss that stressed vowel. Like it's very telling that the reason that Arnold Schwarzenegger said this is he was going from the way it was written, the orthography, not listening to the sound. So a lot of learners have a problem here because they're thinking of the orthography and then they're listening to the sound and they miss that centralized de-stressed schwa. So again, you're looking at it from a perception versus production, and it depends on, definitely they have to be able to perceive that that's what's happening to unstressed vowels, that they're turning into this centralized schwa vowel. As to their production, again, it depends on your circumstances, your specific circumstances, your learner's specific circumstances. To get into that, you want to have a look at the reduced vowel section, which is on pages 131 to 133. Okay. And obviously the other thing that I have here is that primary stress on single syllable words only applies if it's in its citation form. So if you look at the second point on the PowerPoint, I have the difference between and, which is the citation form of the word. So by citation form, we mean what's in the dictionary. So in the dictionary, it's and the primary stress is on that single syllable, right? However, when you stick it inside a sentence, you're going to lose that primary stress because you're going to end up with bread and butter, not bread and butter. So bread and butter, okay? And that takes it down to that schwa, or that schwa with an n coloring on it. So in that case, then it's lost all its stress, okay? Because it's not a citation form anymore. Again, this is something, if the student says bread and butter, okay, I understand that, that's no problem. If the student says, why don't I sound like, you know, American, you can say because that's the citation form and you need to smush it down into the unstressed form, bread and butter, okay? All right, and finally, make sure that you look at relative, as you go through and you're looking at this chapter, make sure that you look at relative functional load. So that's on page 160. Is about, okay. It's the last thing before the exercises. It's table 4.15, and it talks about relative functional load, okay? So if you look at that table, you can see that it's giving you numbers for how important some of these vowel contrasts are compared to other vowel contrasts. So this will give you an idea of what, there goes my CD. So an important one, for example, is I versus a, cat. So bit, bat, for example. That has 100% relative load, meaning that's a critical functional load difference between those two. If you have a learner who can't do the difference between an I and an a very well, that is going to cause probably a high intelligibility issue. Again, the second one, the one that always comes up with Spanish speakers and many other speakers, is the E versus I. That has a 95% high functional load, meaning that if you can't do that difference between those two, that's going to be potentially highly problematic for intelligibility. So you can use some of this information to say, okay, if I'm prioritizing vowel, you know, instruction for students, then I'll prioritize some of these important functional load differences first. In addition, if you do an analysis of your students' language, you can also tell which of these ones are a real problem for them. So that's a super useful thing to keep around. All right. Well, that was all I wanted to pick out of that chapter. But please, does anyone have any other questions or comments of anything else that they would like to pick out of this chapter? Yes, Anne.
Dr. Pickering, so in the book and what you just said about students of native speakers of other languages. Is there a resource that would tell you which functions are more difficult for them versus other language?
Yes, there is. Now, she says, gazing longingly at her books, there's something called, shoot. There is exactly that. There's a book, and I think it's called American Pronunciation, something like that. And at the end, it has a whole load of typical problems that learners from different languages have. Okay, give me 1 second. Let's see if I can locate it really, really quickly. But I'm not sure if I can. Ah, and there we go. God is good to me today. All right, Anne. This is called, and I can write it down for you, but it's called Teaching American English Pronunciation. In fact, why don't I stick it? Don't we have a chat box somewhere? You know, a chat box. Actually, I can. Is it coming up? Is it coming up on the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, so it's called Teaching American English Pronunciation, and it's by Peter Avery and Susan Ehrlich, and it's Oxford University Press, and it's got several editions, but this one is 1996. And what it has at the end of it, so it has a whole load of things about teaching English and pronunciation. And then it has on chapter 8, it says on there, problems of selected language groups. And it gives you Arabic, Chinese, Farsi, French, German, Greek, Hindi, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Polish, Portuguese, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So that's not bad. So, and if you look at it, what it does, so it gives you, it says typical problems of many sort of speakers of Arabic, for example, and it highlights as typical problems for Arabic speakers in terms of consonants versus b, the versus the, and then it gives you problems with the vowels, which ones that they have problems with. In fact, they seem to also have problems with e versus I, a versus e. So they have problems with the tense and lax vowels. So this is a great little book for that. And I've bought it only because I'm not particularly keen on what how it suggests that you teach, but I bought it for that chapter on typical problems. Excellent question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments, questions? Everybody totally comfortable with vowels? Anything that anyone want to tell me about their experience with teaching vowels? I feel like someone should say something to me before I let you go. Anyone had any particular problems, or has anyone taught vowels?
I'm not sure if this is for me when I'm teaching Mandarin Chinese speakers, like there's always some problem with the vowel E and A. I've noticed multiple times, especially with the word want, they'll want to pronounce it as went, or the opposite. If it's went, it's want. And I think it could be because of how that pinyin symbol is pronounced when they're speaking Mandarin Chinese, like the E, it's like eh. in Mandarin. I'm studying it, so I'm not like an expert, but
Yeah.
so that's what I noticed when teaching vowels. They're especially with young children, like they always seem to want to pronounce it in the different way that they've been taught for peeing. So
Oh, that's
Mhm.
interesting.
yeah.
Reading, you mean? Yeah. So, um, that's interesting. Yeah, I can't. I guess it's been a while since I've taught Chinese speakers, but yeah, I mean, for that you could teach them that if that's that like happens all the time, Sarah.
Mhm.
What's the word I'm looking for? You know, it's the one thing that happens every time.
Yeah, and I've noticed with other students, it's not just one, it's
Right,
multiple.
right.
Yeah.
You can make little symbol cards, you know, where I mean it doesn't matter that it's not you know, so basically you've got to get them away from thinking about this if
Peeing.
they're yeah, right. So
The
you
way
can
of reading.
yeah,
Right.
you can make right precisely. You can make little symbol cards and say if you see this symbol, it's a sound, and if you see this symbol, it's a sound. And you can either use the symbols that are in the IPA, or you can use any symbols you want. Literally, all you're doing is just saying. So if they say it, then you just hold it up, and you're like and then they change it. You know, so you're trying to change
Okay.
their internal, you know, their internal
The way
representation.
they're used to reading.
You're just trying to change that internal representation of that word. So you can use, I mean, you can even use colors. You know, you can have a red
Okay.
color stands for, you know, a vowel, and a blue color stands for the other vowel. And you can just, I mean, you can sort of play around with it. And you certainly don't have to take them through the whole phonetic alphabet, but if you've got ubiquitous, that was the word I was looking for. If you've got a ubiquitous problem that's coming up every day, every time, because it's a high functional load vowel,
Mhm.
and you're lucky enough in your case to have not multiple languages, but a single language, which means a lot of your students are making the exact same error, then you
Mhm.
can play around with that in class a lot using any kinds of things that will help them differentiate the sound from the writing. Yeah.
I think I'll try that because I'll be meeting with the student this week. So I'm going to try that with him and see if it works. And then I'll also try it with my other Chinese. The adults don't seem, they kind of have grown out, but for the younger ones, they seem to still be at that stage where they make that same mistake. So I'm going to try it with them.
Do please try it, and please let me know if it actually works.
Yeah, definitely. All I have to do is get, some cards and then
Yeah. Yeah, as I say, you don't feel that you have to use the IPA. No one's telling you have to. You've literally got one issue that you're trying to address, because it is a potentially an intelligibility issue. I agree. They're basically saying another word.
yeah.
Unfortunately, because went and want are both meaningful in English. So that is something that I would say, yeah, I'd want to address that and find a way to do that. Yeah. Good. Well, good luck. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. That was a good idea. Thank you for sharing it with me.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it works. Probably not as good as the M&Ms, but I guess you could
Maybe. We'll see.
color M&M. Yes, you could throw them a different color M&M if they got it right. That might work there. All right, everybody. Well, if no one's got any other questions or comments, that is the basic stuff that we want to know about vowels. So now for your homework, you're going to, for your reading post, you're going to go to page 161 in the classroom section and do questions 1 through 5 and in your book. And then this is the first of your activities. So you have 10 activities in total that are worth 4 points each. So that's double the points that the reading posts are worth. So, put a bit more effort into them. This week, we're going to look at another teacher resource. I really enjoyed, by the way, I've done half of your half of the stuff on the electronic apps, and I've looked at half of your posts, and it seems like you guys really enjoyed them, which is good. I told Ron already that a couple of you really enjoyed his echo vowel chart, because I always enjoyed that too. So the color vowel chart is a particular teacher's aid, and I'm not telling you should go ahead and buy it at all, but if you like it and you're particularly dealing with K through 12 children in the American system, this is a particular, or actually it doesn't matter where you're dealing with them, to be honest. If you've got a class full of children in China, that works just as well. The color vowel chart is a teaching tool where they associate the vowels with colors as opposed to anything else. So it's sort of what I was just saying with Sarah, potentially, that you can associate it with anything that might be meaningful particularly for children, but also for adults. So what I've given you is the teacher's guide, and the teacher's guide is a free PDF, and it totally gives you the idea of what this thing is about. And you can use it, and it gives you a picture of the color chart, and so you can play with it. You can see if you think that it would be a good tool. If you decide in the end that you like it, I think a year ago it was about $50 for the kit. For the full big color chart, it was about $25. But so obviously that's entirely up to you. But I want you to play with it and discuss if you think like it looks like a good teacher's aid to you. And if not, well, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. But I also want you to think about how you would go ahead and address vowel problems. You can, and talk to me about that, the vowel system, and any vowel problems that you have addressed in the past, like Sarah's example. So I want you to talk about that too. So that's written up in your PowerPoint, and there's a assignment tab for that as well. Any questions?
One little quick question. On the reading post for last week, some people did attachments with a Word file, and some people just put it on the online forum. Is there a preferred method, or?
No, I'm not a huge fan of forcing you to talk to each other unless so I don't have a format where I say you have to put yours up and then you have to answer someone else's. So if you want to do it as a file, that's fine. Alternatively, if you put it up there, then I would expect if someone is looking at it, they can say, oh, that's not the answer I got, I thought it was this, or whatever. So you can use it, if you see what I mean, as a way to talk to each other. I'm just not a huge fan of forcing people to talk to each other. I don't know, I have to, we vary quite a lot on this program on that. That's one thing that we vary quite a lot about. I know that there are some faculty who insist that you do at least 2 or 3 posts a week or whatever, because to them it builds community. And I could be totally wrong here. To me, I don't know. It's not really my thing, but we can talk about that at the end of class, and you can tell me, when you tell me everything that you liked and didn't like, you can tell me if you would have preferred that. So the short answer, Anne, is you can do it anyway, either way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else got any questions about anything? Okay, well, in that case, this was a pleasure, and I will see you guys next week. As per usual, if you're done with me, I'm done with you. So bye. If you want to talk to me about anything, stay online, and I will stay here too for a little while. Okay, otherwise, I'll see you next week.